Good morning, Ceann Corla, and thank you for letting me in. I was struggling to make it here in time when the government missed the last lot. Minister, I mentioned some of this earlier on, but just so new Minister is here, the goals of the National Broadband Plan are laudable, and we in People Before Profit believe are essential for rural Ireland. The provision of the services to over 500,000 addresses is not only vital for businesses, but also for ordinary households, schools, etc. In an ever more online world, where high-speed internet access is not some kind of a luxury, but a bare minimum needed to participate fully in this society, it becomes even more essential for access to state services, and it's even more essential in a coronavirus-ridden world that we can access it for remote learning and remote working. So there's no doubt about its importance. However laudable the goals are, the current plan, for historical reasons, falls on every metric. And we've been repeatedly told that this is an essential piece of infrastructure and must be provided by means of massive taxpayer subsidies, 3 billion, but even the most risky gambler would probably not bet that that figure won't rise, as has happened in other outsourced national projects. The primary justification would be the lack of state telecommunications infrastructure, but that in itself is the result of a government decision. Fianna Fáil and the Progressive Democrats in 1999 committed to privatising Telecom Éireann, and it was an absolute disastrous outcome of that decision that is well known in this House. Our national communications infrastructure was repeatedly bought and sold, including by many of the big business names in Ireland. At every stage, the company was loaded with debt and sweated for every cent that could be extracted, starving the company of needed infrastructure, investment, and leaving it incapable of anything like the services required, because it simply couldn't generate the necessary profits for whomever or whatever entity happened to own it at the time. Fintan O'Toole famously said at the time that the assets and equity funds of that company were passed around from Billy to Jack like a joint at a student party. But the decision to privatise telecom didn't happen in a vacuum. It has been part of an ideology, a deep ideology, of outsourcing essential services for state functions to the private sector. And it always has dire outcomes for those of us who rely on those services, and for every person and taxpayer in the country, as the costs always spiral. And private entities involved must have their profits protected, regardless of the cost to the state or the level of service actually provided. The list of failures is probably too long to go into here, but just to mention a few: public-private partnerships on toll roads, on schools that are default and we're paying more and more to have them sorted out, the National Convention Centre, the National Children's Hospital, the cervical check programme. And given the history that a great number of observers on this plan have had very, very serious concerns about it from the outset, it's developed into even worse than what most of us had feared. We now have a 3 billion plan over 25 years where we won't even own the infrastructure at the end of it. And as if all of this wasn't bad enough, recent revelations on the financial structures and entities behind the National Broadband show us that the company created a plan with a network of at least 13 different companies across Ireland, Luxembourg and America. In fact, we now know that David McCourt's firm actually only owns about 10% of MBI, despite contrived corporate structures that seem to indicate that he has a controlling stake. For anyone paying attention to the housing crisis, and I think we all have, we know that the Oak Hill Advisory Fund, the Vulture Fund, has specialised in discounting bad loans to sweat borrowers and underlying assets for cash. In the last Dáil, Fianna Fáil famously called for the nationalisation of the broadband plan, but they're silent on that issue now. But I'd like to echo that call on behalf of People Before Profit, that any essential infrastructure in this state cannot be outsourced, as the list of those I have already mentioned, and that this outsourcing programme is a disaster. Not only is it a disaster, but those who are given the responsibility to oversee the funding, the ownership and the control of the company is Ernst & Young. They did a great job, didn't they, on the banks. when they audited Anglo-Irish. And if that's what we're relying on, well then God help Ireland, because I think we're heading down a disastrous road.
Thank you.